If you've been looking for a new or certified Toyota, come be part of the team. With inventory arriving daily, we'll help you find a vehicle that works for your lifestyle and budget. We'll continue to ensure that your next buying experience is as safe and efficient as possible. Our service center is open with easy online scheduling and a quick, clean process to get you back on the road safely. Head to teamtoyota.net and be safe, be strong, be a team. Hey everybody, welcome to the Phillies Talk Podcast presented by Team Toyota. Corey Seidman and Jim Salisbury here with you as always. And there was some news last night. We found out that David Ortiz was the lone player elected for the 2022 Baseball Hall of Fame class. It was an interesting ballot, Jim. It included a number of great players who were on their final year of the ballot because of PED concerns. Another one in Curt Schilling, not necessarily for PED reasons. And also a lot of players who either spent their entire career here or most of it. So let's start with the fact that one player got in. Were you surprised that it was just Ortiz?
I was not. I figured that would be the way it would go. Bonds, Schilling, Clemens, Sosa, they were all in their final year of eligibility. And, the way the numbers were trending, it just appeared to be they weren't going to make that up. The way the numbers were trending, Ortiz looked like the guy who was going to get in. I mean, the elephant in the room is he has been connected to steroids, or PED, the PED era, like Bonds and Clemens and Sosa. And obviously that is what kept them out, those connections. But Ortiz had the benefit, I believe. I mean, he reportedly, the New York Times in I think 2009, I think it was, reported that he had tested positive when they were doing survey testing. And it was supposed to be anonymous survey testing. I remember when they were doing it because baseball was trying to establish a steroid program, a policy against steroids, and the union agreed to this survey testing so both sides could get their arms around it and figure out how prevalent this was. So they had these anonymous tests. Well, lo and behold, several years later, some names are leaked, or at least Big Papi David Ortiz's name is leaked. New York Times reports it. Several years after that, the commissioner basically absolved him and said, that was anonymous testing. Some of it was not accurate. We believe there were a number of false positives. Also, there were things registering that you could buy over the counter that weren't necessarily illegal. So it was like, the commissioner said, don't pay attention to that. It might not be legit. And I think enough voters, there are at least the voters who were against, who have a policy of not voting for people they believe or know that use PEDs, they were willing to look over that and just consider David Ortiz's numbers and his work on the field. And if that's the case, it was awesome. This is a guy who was released by the Minnesota Twins. Once upon a time, he was Seattle Mariners property, traded to Minnesota for Dave Hollins, former 1993 Philly, old friend. And Big Papi went to Minnesota and put up good numbers, but then was released and then went to Boston in 2003 and started putting up absolutely humongous numbers. And he was just a force. They had won the World Series in 86 years. They had that great comeback against the Yankees. And I remember him just hitting, having some big hits, one extra innings home run at Fenway Park in that ALCS. And then, he helped them win 3 World Series. His team that couldn't win a World Series, he goes and they win 3 of them, right? And then, his career OPS in the World Series was like 1,300. He had it all: big hits, big moments, big numbers. And certainly when you look at the numbers and the performance and the whole, all the stuff that appears on the baseball reference page, he's a Hall of Famer, and he's a first ballot Hall of Famer, 58th first ballot Hall of Famer, and hats off to him.
Jim, do you think that Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens have a shot at getting in through one of these special election committees? They both fell short. Bonds got, 66% of the vote. Clemens got 65.2% of the vote. What was needed was 75%, and they fell off the ballot along with Sammy Sosa and Curt Schilling. But Bonds and Clemens are kind of in a class of their own because they were so accomplished before they got huge, and they were so accomplished before there were the PED concerns. Do you think that that's inevitably going to get them in?
I don't know. And, I hear that argument all the time. Oh, they were Hall of Famers before they started doing that stuff. I mean, that doesn't hold any water for me. I mean, if you're leading the Masters and you cheat on the 15th hole, you cheated, if you're leading it by 10 shots and you cheat on the 16th hole, you cheated. So I don't know that'll. I think it definitely factors into some writers' ballots, and I respect their opinions. But just because you had a great 10 or 12 years out of the gate doesn't mean that you can just start picking up and doing that stuff. It doesn't give you a license to start doing that stuff. And I know it was there were no rules against it at that time, but people have consciences and things like that, and they're competitors. They know what limits or what they're pushing to go over the line there. So I'm not sure that holds any water with me. I'm not sure it would hold water with some of these veterans committees, where some of the guys connected to PEDs have made strides on the writers' ballot with sort of younger voters that have come on board, and those committees at the Hall of Fame, the Today's Game Committee, I think it's called, the one of them's going to meet as soon as this coming December, which is, calendar year 2022. So these guys could end up on another ballot here before the year is out. And some of those committees tend to be made up of, older voters, not necessarily BBWA guys. They have executives, former players, Hall of Famers, so I will say an older review panel, and I don't think those guys will view steroid use, favorably. You had Joe Morgan a few years ago, who was on the Hall of Fame board of directors, came out and said he didn't think that there was a place for the steroid users in the Hall of Fame. So every person's ballot is, he's the judge and jury of his own ballot, and they can do what they want to do with it. But I still believe, even as those guys move on to other, review by other groups, they're going to have problems. Maybe I'm wrong, but what would have been nice is, if the Hall of Fame had stepped up years ago and said, hey, baseball writers have voted since 1936 for the Hall of Fame, and we just want you to consider what these guys did on the field. But they really offered no guidance. They said, you interpret the guidelines any way you want to interpret them, and right on the ballot, and when the ballots are issued, there is a clause that asks voters to consider sportsmanship, character, and things like that. And so for a lot of voters, steroid use was a breach of sportsmanship. So that shows in their ballots. So, obviously Clemens and Bonds belong there. I mean, a 7-time MVP, a 7-time Cy Young winner, greatest right-handed pitcher ever, maybe the greatest player ever, and they're not in the Hall of Fame. And the guy who has the most hits ever, Pete Rose, is not in the Hall of Fame for other reasons. So there's definitely a hole in that gallery of bronze plaques. But I'm not sure how the hole gets filled. I'm not sure how it gets rectified. But if a voter thinks, or a writer, or even on these veterans committee type things, if they think, steroids were a breach of sportsmanship, regardless of when they did them in their career, that's their right. And if they want to withhold the vote, that's their right. I know every Hall of Famer I know, a voter I know, is very conscientious. The guys on those veterans committees are very conscientious. So I'm sure they'll give it a whole lot of thought. If it was just based on accomplishment on the field, obviously those guys would sail in. They would be first ballot. Now they've dropped off after 10 years. How about Alex Rodriguez? First time. David Ortiz was first time. Alex Rodriguez, first time. I mean, he was a great player, but he served a steroid suspension, and it showed in his votes totals. I don't know if he'll ever get there. So it's a real sad chapter for me in baseball, because we should be celebrating the Hall of Fame, and Hall of Fame Day should be a day of celebration. And all we do is focus on the negative because of the choices guys made. So it's a conflicting day for me.
So 10 years, if you're not elected in by then, you come off the ballot. You also come off the ballot if you fail to get 5% of the vote. And that happened to several players, one of them being Ryan Howard, who was in his first year on the ballot. He got just 8 votes, which was 2%. So he comes off. Got to admit, looking at some of the guys who got more votes, like Joe Nathan, the former closer, got more than twice as many Hall of Fame votes as Ryan Howard, which doesn't feel quite right. I know Howard didn't have the longest of peaks, but I don't know, 2% feels kind of low. What do you think?
Yeah, on first blush, I thought it was a little low, but I think you kind of hit it on the head. Ryan Howard was a dominant hitter. We were talking about the numbers last night from 06 to 11. So that's 6 years. He led the majors in RBIs and home runs. He was a feared presence in the batter's box. But that peak probably just wasn't long enough, and that cost him votes, and ultimately is the reason he only got 2%. The peak wasn't long enough. Is it fair? I mean, who knows? I mean, life's not fair. Is it fair he blew out his Achilles coming out of the batter's box on the last swing of 2011? And that changed his career trajectory. That changed him as a player. He was never the same player. If he stays healthy, he might sail in. Keep racking up and stacking up totals. He might sail in. But injuries are a tough thing on players, and I do think that is the reason ultimately he fell off the ballot so early. We'll see if that happens to Chase Utley in 2 years. He had the bad knees, and he was a peak. He had some great peak years. Was his peak long enough before the knees went bad and he became a different player? We'll see. I think one of the guiding principles of a lot of voters was this guy dominant in his era? Okay, well, what is an era? Yeah, usually 10 years or so. Howard, great player, just came up short in that period of dominance for a lot of voters. And that's one of the things about the Hall of Fame debate is like we like poke holes in guys' games, and it feels unfair because Ryan Howard was just a great player. And he has no reason to hang his head. I mean, this guy's going to go on the Phillies Wall of Fame someday. He was a Rookie of the Year. He was an MVP. We mentioned that 6-year period of dominance. I mean, he put a ton of fannies in the seats at Citizens Bank Park. He electrified an entire region, or helped electrify with Jimmy and Chase and all those guys, Hamels. He had a great career. It's just going to come up short of the Hall of Fame. That's all.
So it goes both ways. I mean, there are situations where over the course of years, over the course of the 10-year period, a player will gain momentum and more votes. And that's happening right now to Scott Rolen. It happened in recent years with Larry Walker. It happened with Tim Raines a few years before that. There just becomes this kind of internet campaign. And once enough people are behind that candidate, it almost seems inevitable. And with Scott Rolen, interestingly, he went from about 52% last year to 63% this year. So a more than 10% jump. And as we said, the threshold is 75%. In talking about peaks, Ryan Howard had that 6-year peak. It's not as if Rollins' peak was so much longer. His was about 8 years. He was obviously one of the greatest defensive third basemen ever. And that's a position that I think most of us agree is underrepresented in the Hall of Fame. But just kind of like looking at the way the wind's blowing, do you think Rollins eventually going to get in?
Yeah, you don't have to be a weatherman to know which way the wind is blowing on this one. Up over what, 65% now?
63% was what
63. I don't think anybody who's ever gotten that high of a percentage in his fifth year, which he just was on his fifth ballot. Anybody in that realm has ever missed out on the Hall of Fame. So I think he was like fourth on percentage on this ballot, and the guys ahead of him are now off the ballot. I think it's trending that way, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him on stage next year or the year after. I watched a lot of his career here in Philadelphia. He was a dazzling defensive third baseman. And, it heartens me to see people consider defense because, that should be your goal, to be a complete player, not just a offensive force. You should, baseball is about being a complete guy, a complete player. And Scotty was a complete player. What a defender. And I think he gains a lot of foothold with some of the more sabermetrically inclined voters. I mean, he had a very strong WAR. What was his career WAR?
I don't know off the top of my head.
I thought you were on the computer.
Guys like Rolen and Andrew Jones would be really high because for a good portion of their career, they were top offensive and top defensive players.
Yeah. I think his WAR was like, I'm going to look it up. Hold on.
I'm going to beat you to it.
Huh?
I'm going to try to beat you to it here, Jim.
Oh, you do it then, because I might actually. I'm so dumb, I might lose my connection.
Well, funny enough, Jim actually did lose his connection trying to look up Scott Rolen's WAR. Sorry for that little bit of confusion. Rolen's WAR was 69.9 for his career, which is a very high number because he was a good offensive, defensive player, ran the bases well. Year by year in his prime, he was between like 5 and 6 WAR, which is significant. I mean, that's like 3 times higher than a league average player. Although I'll be honest, when I was watching Scott Rolen in the moment, I didn't think I was watching a Hall of Famer. That said, perceptions do change over time, and it seems like a lot of people view Rolen as that now.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Like when you watched him, you didn't know you were watching a Hall of Famer because, he didn't light it up. Like Ryan Howard for 6 years lit it up, with 50 plus home runs, 45 plus home runs, just huge seasons. I mean, Scotty was just more steady, and he did it on both sides of the ball. And you mentioned the base running. I mean, amazing base runner. Won a World Series. The Gold Gloves are the defense, probably a separator for him. Really a complete player, and that WAR. Whether or not you believe in WAR, I do think it can be a good indicator that that's a pretty good player, and he might end up getting there in the next year or so. I'd be actually at this point with 63%. I'd be very surprised if he doesn't. He's got 5 years left on the ballot. He's going to get there.
Another former Philly who's building some momentum but might just not have enough time remaining on the ballot is Billy Wagner, who is at 51% here in his 7th year on the ballot, so 3 more chances for Wagner. I've talked to you about this in the past. I think Billy Wagner is a Hall of Famer. I mean, you look at the dominance that he had throughout his 15-year career, 5 years under a 2 ERA out of 15 full seasons for Wagner. His final season with the Braves was kind of similar to David Ortiz in that he went out on top. He went out with one of the best years that he had. And when you look at some of the closers who are already in, Wagner, in terms of rate stats and in terms of dominance, like strikeouts and limiting the hits and the home runs, he has better numbers than some of those guys. It's just a question of, is he going to be able to get from 51% to 75% in 3 years?
Yeah, Wagner's I think he has a very, very strong case. I mean, a lot of times when I think about Hall of Famers, did I feel like I was watching greatness? And for most, Jimmy Rollins, I thought I was watching greatness. I mean, the way he could field the ball, such an exciting player. Schilling, I thought I was watching greatness. I mean, Utley and Howard, you watched greatness a lot of nights. And Billy Wagner, I thought he was a great closer. If anything works against him, maybe it's his postseason performance. And it's the fact that he was a specialist. I don't think he got to 1,000 innings. I think maybe some would hold that against him. If you still have that up, do you? Did he get to 1,000 innings? Is that noteworthy in your mind?
Did Wagner get to 1,000 innings? I'm checking right now. Let's see. Did he fall just short? He finished with 903. I mean, really, if it comes to that, are people going to quibble of 903 versus?
Yeah, I'm just
when you add in the postseason innings as well. I mean, he appeared in the postseason in what 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different years. Wow, he did not have a good postseason run. I didn't realize his ERA was over 10 in the playoffs. Yeah, that probably factors into it a little bit. But man,
yeah, I do think postseason matters. I think it was had Curt Schilling not basically tweeted himself out of consideration on a lot of writers' ballots, he'd be there, and you'd have to say his postseason record was a real separator for him, curse busting like Big Papi's. Utley had a couple huge when he gets on the ballot, a couple of iconic postseason moments. That defensive play in game game 5 up the middle, and then the 5 home runs in 09. So I do think postseason can definitely enhance a postseason resume, and similarly can maybe hurt a postseason resume. But here we are again, and I guess that's just the nature of the time, poking holes in another guy. Billy Wagner had a great career. 51%. He's got to hustle, but Billy Wagner, if he's in the Hall of Fame, that's not going to diminish the Hall of Fame at all. That guy was a great one.
The other players, the Phillies ties, obviously Jimmy Rollins got 9.4% of the vote, so he will remain on for another year. Bobby Abreu, 8.6%. He's kind of lingered the last 2 years or so in that high single digits range. And Jonathan Papelbon was one and done. He got 1.3% of the vote. Papelbon recently in a Boston radio interview said that the 2012 Phillies were the best team that he ever played for. Remember that he won a World Series in Boston, yet he thinks that 2012 Phillies team that had Halladay and Lee and the guys like Utley, Rollins, Howard at the end, he thought that was the most talented team he ever played for. Just kind of found that interesting.
Well, they were a 500 team. I mean,
yeah,
I think if you looked at what he was saying, he might have meant best personnel.
No, that is what he meant. The talent.
When you look at Howard and Utley and Rollins, best first baseman, second baseman, shortstop franchise history, 3 Wall of Famers, and Cole Hamels, and Ruiz, and they did have a hell of a group there, but they didn't stay healthy, and they didn't win enough. So the teams he played on in Boston, that 07 team, was ultimately a World Series team. But I know what he means. The personnel was really good. They got hurt. They didn't play well, and you don't win with the bios on the back of the bubblegum card. You win by performing, and to perform you got to stay healthy. And that team got beaten up and old and broken down and finished 500.
And very quickly, Papelbon became a luxury on a rebuilding team and was traded to Washington, where he had some fireworks in the dugout with Bryce Harper, as we all remember. Jim,
I was at that game. I remember the day that happened. It was against the Phillies. And so the press box in Washington is like, it might as well be on top of a skyscraper. It's so high, You're like on top of, they don't even have any tall buildings in Washington. It's probably the tallest building in Washington or something. And you really can't see into the dugout, but they have these monitors. And I had a monitor like right at eye level, like hanging from the ceiling. And I'm looking at it. And it was surreal because all of a sudden you see Papelbon going after Harper, and you're like, hold on, what's happening? And then like you look down in the dugout and you do see some action a little bit from up high. You're like, oh my God, this is unfolding right here on TV. It was quite a moment for Pap. Pap was always interesting, He Bryce Harper's neck wasn't the only thing he grabbed. He grabbed something else during his time in Philly, which was, I'm sure, there's pictures of out there.
Yeah, he grabbed a lot of headlines too. Jim, there's still a lockout going on, as you're well aware. MLB and the Players Association met 2 days in a row this week, and reportedly there's been some headway. There's also a report that the MLBPA dropped its push for earlier free agency eligibility, which seemed like it was one of the top items on their checklist was to get these guys to free agency earlier rather than have to go through that 6-year process of team control. There is a proposal that awards voting and WAR totals could be tied to increases in players' salary. So like Bob Nightingale of USA Today pointed out that under that system, if it were to come in, Jonathan India, the rookie of the year in the National League last season, would have gotten more than $1 million in incentives because of his WAR and his award voting status. Pretty interesting. I think it's kind of flawed because WAR itself is flawed. But obviously, these sides are trying to figure out a way to get guys paid more earlier while not getting to free agency earlier.
Yeah, and ultimately, they're going to have to figure out a way to get younger players more money. And if they're backing off that 6-year free agents thing, which the owners said was a non-starter, they're not going to back off that. They must have other plans in the works to get these guys more money. I have serious misgivings about connecting it to WAR, which is an opinion and largely an opinion, right? And
it is. And sorry to interrupt, but as Sean Foreman, who runs Baseball Reference, he had a very good tweet thread yesterday about how WAR is an evolving stat. And as algorithms change, the number changes. As park factors change, as when we learn more about a new stadium, for example, that it maybe suppresses hitters, that changes for a pitcher and a hitter, what their WAR might be. There's so many factors that go into it, and it's changing over time. So it just feels very off to tie that. I get awards voting, but I don't know. Attaching WAR could open up a can of worms.
Yeah, they're just going to have to figure out a way to get these guys paid sooner because front offices are valuing, young talent, getting them there, and they feel like they're not getting paid because the system is outdated. And I don't disagree with them, but these are smart people. They should be able to figure this out. This is a $10 billion industry. They should be able to figure it out. And guess what? They better hurry. 4 days ago, the NFL had a banner day, and it's all anybody's talking about, going to Wawa to get my coffee and something. Just watch those games? Yeah, I watched those games. They were great. So nobody's talking about baseball because nobody wants to talk about the lockout. They just want to know when it's over. You know what I mean? When are they going to play ball? And what's the date today? 24th?
January 26th.
Today's the 26th? I am not only a day late and $1 short, I'm 2 days late and $2 short. Jeez. It's 26th? Where's my life going?
I don't know. Time flies, man.
Oh, my God. So, in ordinary years on the 26th of January, a baseball writer is thinking about, okay, what am I going to bring to spring training? Anything I want to ship down? Maybe when I'm going to time my last haircut before spring training, and do I need a new suitcase? And where am I going to stay? And guess what? I haven't thought of any of those things. It doesn't feel like spring training is right around the corner. Fans love to go to spring training and get some sun, watch some baseball, frolic, and spend money. Who's going to go? And if it goes to me, if they're not in camp by March 1st, and I'm talking like legitimately in camp, up and running, going through the protocols and physicals and picture day, up and running on March 1st, they might have to tinker with the regular season, and that's going to be damaging. So baseball's done a really, really, I guess thank goodness for the Hall of Fame, even with all its, even with all the problems with the voting and the negativity and the steroids and the this and the that and who belongs and who's mad, and didn't get in, all that, at least there's some baseball buzz. But it's over now. So, the hot stove was dead this winter. That's not good for baseball. And now we're, moving towards spring training and there's really no action. They're gonna do some damage to their sport if they don't get this thing fixed up here and get it ready to go and figure out how to peacefully share $10 billion. because there's no substitute for what you see on the field, and they need to get on the field and they need to construct their teams. There's still a lot of off-season business that's going to be compressed into who knows how long. But who knows? At least they're talking. But to me, they have to hustle because the sports world is zooming past them.
Yeah, at least they're talking, because prior to this week, it had been, I think, just one meeting that lasted less than 10 minutes. So perhaps there is some ground being covered there and some room for optimism. But yeah, I agree. And you referenced the great NFL weekend. It kind of reminded me, the last time that I can remember that exciting of a playoff game in baseball was back in 2011. You remember that Rangers-Cardinals series, that great World Series, where in Game 6, one team would score, the other team would score. One team would score, the other team would score. I think it was the Cardinals scored 2 in the ninth, sent it to extras. Then both teams scored in extras, and the Cardinals won. I mean, that's kind of what that Chiefs.
Was that David Freese?
That sure was. That was his coming out party. Yep.
The David Freese World Series. He was a pretty good player, David Freese.
It's been 11 years since then. Can you believe it? It's been 11 years since then. Can you believe that? Man. All right. Well, that's going to wrap up this Phillies Talk podcast. Thanks a lot for listening. Talk to you soon.